I discovered the HOA's dirty little secret on a frigid January morning when my heating bill came in at $738 for a two-bedroom ranch house in suburban Michigan. My name is Marcus Lancaster, and I'd bought my modest home in Pinewood Grove, just outside Grand Rapids, about 18 months prior. The neighborhood seemed decent enough when I moved in. Nothing fancy, just a collection of ranch houses built in the 70s, mature trees lining the streets, and what I thought would be reasonable HOA fees of $75 a month. I worked as an industrial electrician, pulling good money but not enough to throw around carelessly. That heating bill made my stomach drop. I checked my furnace immediately, thinking maybe it was running inefficiently or needed maintenance. Everything looked fine. The unit was only 6 years old, well-maintained and running normally. I called the gas company, demanding an explanation for the astronomical charge. They sent someone out the next day, the technician, a guy named Phil who looked about ready to retire, spent 2 hours going over everything with his equipment. He checked for leaks, examined my meter, and reviewed the usage data on his tablet. Finally, he stood up from inspecting the meter outside and gave me a puzzled look. "Your usage is through the roof," Phil said, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Like, way higher than it should be for a house this size. You keeping it at 80 degrees or something?" 68, I replied. "Same as always. What the hell is going on?" Phil scratched his head, looking at the meter again. "Honestly, Mr. Lancaster, I've seen this kind of usage from houses 3 times your size or from commercial operations. You running any kind of business out of your garage or anything?" "No, nothing like that." I felt a knot forming in my stomach. Could there be a problem with the meter? "Meter's reading accurately. Whatever's using this gas is definitely connected to your line." He paused, looking around my property. "You know what? Let me trace your line from the meter." Sometimes in these older developments, there can be crossed connections, especially if work was done and not properly documented. That's when things got interesting. Phil followed the gas line from my meter, and instead of it going directly into my house as it should, he discovered a junction box buried under some landscaping near my property line. The line split. One branch went to my house. The other ran underground toward the back of the development. "Well, that's not right," Phil muttered. "That's definitely not right." We followed the second line as best we could, tracing it through the common area behind my property. It led straight to a large metal barn structure that sat on HOA property, about 200 feet from my back fence. The building housed the HOA's landscaping equipment, lawn mowers, snow removal gear, and maintenance supplies. Phil knocked on the barn door. It was unlocked, so we went inside. There, mounted on the far wall, was a commercial-grade furnace, humming away and pumping heat into the 1,500-square-foot structure. The thermostat was set to 65 degrees. "There's your problem," Phil said flatly. "You've been heating the HOA's barn all winter." "Probably last winter too." My hands clenched into fists. "How is that even legal?" "It's not. This is theft of services, plain and simple. Someone deliberately connected this building to your meter." Phil took photos with his phone. "I'm documenting all of this. You're going to want to file a report with the gas company and probably the police. This is serious." My mind raced through the implications. If this had been going on since I moved in, I'd potentially paid thousands of dollars heating a building I didn't own and never used. I pulled out my phone and started taking my own photos and videos, documenting everything from the furnace to the gas line connection. "Can you shut it off?" I asked Phil. "I can shut off your entire service at the meter, but then you'd have no heat either. The real solution is to disconnect this illegal line, but that's beyond my authority. You'll need to take this up with the gas company officially and probably get a licensed plumber involved." We locked up the barn and headed back to my house. Phil gave me copies of his inspection report and assured me he'd file his own report with the company. I immediately called the gas company's customer service line and started the formal complaint process. Then, I called the non-emergency police line. The officer who came out, a young woman named Deputy Chen, took my statement and reviewed all the photos and documentation. She examined the setup herself, accompanied by Phil, who'd stuck around to provide his professional assessment. "This is pretty cut and dry," Deputy Chen said. "Someone illegally tapped into your gas line. The question is who authorized it and when. Do you know who has access to HOA facilities? The HOA board, I guess, and probably their maintenance contractor." I pulled up the HOA information on my phone. The president is Linda Patterson. She lives 3 streets over. I'll need to speak with her. Given the amount of money involved, this could be prosecuted as felony theft depending on the total. You'll want to gather all your gas bills since you moved in. Deputy Chen left to track down Linda Patterson while I went inside and pulled up every gas bill I'd received. The pattern was clear. My bills had been consistently higher than they should be, especially during the winter months. I calculated that, over the 18 months, I'd probably paid somewhere between $8,000 and $10,000 more than I should have. An hour later, Deputy Chen returned with a woman I recognized from HOA meetings. Linda Patterson was in her mid-50s, with the kind of severe haircut and pinched expression that screamed middle management. She wore a puffy coat and had her arms crossed defensively. "Mr. Lancaster," she said stiffly, "I understand there's been some confusion about the utility connections." Confusion? I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. "Someone illegally connected your barn to my gas meter. I've been paying to heat your building for a year and a half." Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. "The barn has always been heated that way. It's how the development was set up originally. The lot your house sits on was designated to provide utilities to the common equipment storage." "Show me where that's written in my deed or the HOA bylaws," I challenged. She blinked. "Well, it's just how things have always been done. The previous owner never complained." The previous owner probably didn't realize they were being ripped off, and even if they did agree to it, I never did. I want that connection severed immediately, and I want reimbursement for every penny I've paid. Deputy Chen interjected. "Miss Patterson, do you have any documentation showing that Mr. Lancaster agreed to this arrangement? Any easement or utility agreement in writing?" "I'll have to check the HOA records," Linda hedged. "You do that," the deputy said, "because right now this looks like theft of services. If there's no legal documentation, the HOA could be facing criminal charges, not to mention civil liability." Linda's face paled slightly. "I'm sure we can work something out reasonably. There's no need for all this drama." "Drama?" My voice rose. "You've been stealing from me for 18 months. I want that furnace disconnected today." "The equipment in that barn is worth over $50,000, Linda protested. "It needs climate control. If the temperature drops too much, the machinery could be damaged. The snow removal equipment alone costs more than your house." "That's not my problem. Get your own utilities." Linda's expression hardened. "Mr. Lancaster, as HOA president, I'm ordering you to maintain the current heating arrangement. The barn is classified as a common area amenity that benefits the entire neighborhood, and your property carries the utility obligation." Deputy Chen stepped forward. "Madam, you can't order someone to provide utilities they're paying for to property they don't own. That's not how any of this works." The HOA bylaws give me broad authority to maintain common areas, Linda insisted. She pulled out her phone and started tapping. I'm calling our lawyer. We'll see what he has to say about this. While she made her call, I pulled Phil aside. What would it take to disconnect that barn from my line? You'd need a licensed plumber to cap off the junction. Couple hours of work, maybe $300. But that furnace in there needs to be on its own meter eventually, or it won't have gas service at all. I don't care if they freeze, I said. I just want my line serving only my property. Linda finished her call and walked back over, looking smug. Our attorney says that the utility arrangement is covered under the common area maintenance provisions of the HOA bylaws. All homeowners are required to support common area infrastructure. Does your attorney know that support doesn't mean one homeowner pays for everything? Deputy Chen asked dryly. Because that's not how shared expenses work. Shared means everyone pays their fair share, usually through HOA fees. The bylaws give the board discretion in how to allocate maintenance responsibilities, Linda countered. I'd had enough. Fine. Here's what's going to happen. I'm hiring a plumber tomorrow to disconnect that junction and cap off the line running to your barn. What you do after that is your business, but you're not using another cubic foot of my gas. If you do that, I'll fine you for damaging HOA property, Linda threatened. Fine me all you want. I'll see you in court. I turned to Deputy Chen. Are we done here, for now? I'm filing a report on the theft of services. The prosecutor's office will review it. Miss Patterson, I strongly suggest you consult with that attorney about the HOA's liability here, because Mr. Lancaster has a very strong case. Deputy Chen handed us both her card and left. Linda glared at me. You're making a big mistake. The HOA has resources and authority that you clearly don't understand. This isn't over. You're right, I agreed. It's not over. Not until I'm reimbursed for every cent you've stolen from me. She stomped back to her car and drove off. I immediately started searching for plumbers on my phone. I found one who could come out the next morning for an emergency service call. It would cost me $450, but it would be worth it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept running through the numbers, getting angrier each time. Even being conservative, the HOA had stolen at least $8,000 from me. That was real money. Money I could have used for renovations or saved or invested. Instead, it had gone to heating a barn full of lawn mowers. The plumber, a gruff guy named Tom, arrived at 8 the next morning. I showed him the junction box and explained the situation. He whistled low. Whoever installed this knew exactly what they were doing. This is professional work, just illegal as hell. Give me 2 hours, and I'll have your line isolated and properly capped. Do it, I told him. Tom worked efficiently, digging up the junction box and disconnecting the line that fed the barn. He capped both ends properly, inspected all his work, and tested my house's gas flow to make sure everything still worked correctly. By 10:30, my gas line served only my property, exactly as it should have from the beginning. You're all set, Tom said, packing up his tools. That other line is dead now. Whatever was connected to it won't have gas service anymore. I paid him in cash and got a detailed receipt describing exactly what work he'd performed. Documentation would be crucial for the lawsuit I was already planning. Around noon, my doorbell started ringing aggressively. I opened it to find Linda Patterson standing there with another woman I recognized as Deborah Hughes, the HOA vice president. Both looked furious. What did you do? Linda demanded, pushing past me into my entryway before I could stop her. Get out of my house, I said firmly. You disconnected the barn's heating. Do you have any idea what you've done? I disconnected an illegal tap on my gas line. What you do about heating your barn is your problem. Deborah, a rail, thin woman with bleached blonde hair, pointed a finger at me. That barn contains over $50,000 in equipment that the HOA owns collectively. You just put all of it at risk. If anything is damaged because of what you did, you're personally liable. No, I'm not. I'm not responsible for your property or how you heat it. Get your own utility service like everyone else. The gas company says it will take 6 weeks to run a new line and install a meter, Linda said. 6 weeks. Temperatures are supposed to drop below zero this weekend. The equipment will be ruined. Not my problem, I repeated. You should have thought about that before you decided to steal from me for 18 months. We didn't steal anything, Linda snapped. That arrangement was in place before you bought your house. You assumed the obligation when you purchased the property. Show me in writing where I agreed to that. Linda's jaw clenched. It's implied in the HOA bylaws. Implied doesn't mean crap. Either I explicitly agreed to pay for utilities to your barn, or I didn't. And I didn't. Deborah pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my living room. What are you doing? I asked. Documenting your property for the lawsuit. The HOA will be taking you to court for the damage you've caused. Get out of my house right now, or I'm calling the police for trespassing. Linda held up her hands in mock surrender. Fine, we're leaving. But you haven't heard the last of this. Emergency HOA meeting tonight at 7. Your attendance is mandatory. I'll be there, I said, and I'll be presenting my own demands for reimbursement. They left, and I immediately called the gas company to confirm the disconnection was logged in their system. Then I called a lawyer. I found one who specialized in property law and HOA disputes, a guy named Richard Moss, whose office was in downtown Grand Rapids. I explained the situation, and he agreed to see me that afternoon. Richard was in his early 40s, sharp-eyed and professional. He reviewed all my documentation, the gas bills, the photos, Deputy Chen's report, and the HOA bylaws. This is actually pretty straightforward, he said after about an hour of review. The HOA has no legal right to use your utilities without your explicit written consent, which you never gave. The fact that they did it anyway constitutes theft of services. You have grounds for both criminal complaints and civil action. What about their threat to sue me? I asked. Empty threat. They have no damages. You disconnected an illegal connection to your own utility service. That's well within your rights as a property owner. If anything, they're the ones facing significant liability. Richard leaned back in his chair. How do you want to proceed? I want full reimbursement for all the gas I paid for, plus interest and legal fees, and I want them to stop harassing me. Reasonable. I'll draft a demand letter and attend tonight's HOA meeting with you if you'd like. That's probably a good idea, actually. These situations can get heated, and having legal representation present often keeps things civil. I hired him on the spot. We spent another hour preparing for the evening meeting, going over exactly what I should and shouldn't say. Richard would do most of the talking. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a small building near the front entrance of the neighborhood. When Richard and I arrived at 7, about 30 people were already there, including most of the 5-member HOA board. Linda sat at a table at the front, looking like she was ready for battle. Deborah sat next to her along with the other board members, Treasurer Paul Matthews, Secretary Janet Reeves, and Member-at-Large Kevin Stone. The room went quiet when we entered. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Linda stood up. Mr. Lancaster, I'm glad you decided to attend. We have serious matters to discuss regarding your reckless actions. Richard stepped forward before I could respond. Good evening. I'm Richard Moss, attorney at law representing Mr. Lancaster. Before this meeting proceeds, I want to make clear that this conversation is being documented, and anything said here may be used in subsequent legal proceedings. That got everyone's attention. Linda's eyes narrowed. The HOA also has legal representation. Our attorney is on the phone. She gestured to a conference phone on the table. Stephen Crawford here. A tinny voice came through the speaker. I represent the Pinewood Grove HOA. Mr. Moss, I've advised my clients of their rights in this matter. Excellent, Richard said smoothly. Then you've also advised them that they've been engaged in ongoing theft of services from my client, and that they face both criminal and civil liability for their actions. Murmurs rippled through the room. Several homeowners looked confused, clearly not knowing what had happened. Linda raised her voice. That's a gross mischaracterization. The utility arrangement for the equipment barn has been in place for over 20 years. It's part of the infrastructure of this community. Then you'll have no problem producing the written agreement where my client consented to this arrangement, Richard countered. Stephen Crawford's voice came through the speaker. The arrangement predates Mr. Lancaster's ownership. He purchased the property subject to all existing easements and obligations. Produce the easement, Richard challenged. Show me where it's recorded in the deed, where my client was notified of it during the sale, where he signed acknowledging it. Because I've reviewed the deed, the title report, and all closing documents, there's no mention of any utility easement. Silence from the phone. Linda shuffled papers, clearly stalling. Finally, Stephen spoke again. The obligation is implied through the HOA bylaws, which Mr. Lancaster agreed to abide by when he purchased property in the community. The bylaws require homeowners to pay their fair share of common area maintenance through HOA dues, Richard said. They don't authorize the HOA to designate one specific homeowner to bear the entire utility cost for a common area facility. That would be arbitrary and capricious, and likely void as unconscionable. I was glad I'd hired him. He was way better at this legal back and forth than I would have been. Linda tried a different approach. Regardless of the legal technicalities, Mr. Lancaster's actions have put the entire community at risk. The equipment in that barn serves everyone in this neighborhood. Without it, we can't maintain the common areas, can't plow the streets, can't mow the lawns. He's being selfish and destructive. My client is being victimized by theft, Richard corrected. The fact that the HOA is now facing the consequences of their illegal actions doesn't make my client the wrongdoer here. An older man in the back raised his hand. I'm confused. Are you saying the HOA has been making Marcus pay to heat the storage barn? For 18 months, yes, Richard confirmed, costing him approximately $8,000 to $10,000. More murmurs, louder now. Several people looked shocked. A woman I didn't know called out. How is that even possible? Don't they have their own meter? Linda's face reddened. The barn's utilities have always been handled through the adjacent property. It's a cost-saving measure that benefits everyone by keeping HOA dues lower. It benefits everyone except Mr. Lancaster, who's been forced to pay the entire cost, Richard pointed out. If the HOA wants to heat the barn, they need to install their own utility service and pay for it through HOA dues like any other common expense. Paul Matthews, the treasurer, spoke up. He was a heavy-set man in his 60s with white hair. Linda, did you know about this arrangement? Of course I knew, Linda said. It's in the records. It's been this way since the barn was built. But does Marcus's deed show he was responsible for it? Linda hesitated. The property has always carried that obligation. That's not an answer, Paul said, sounding troubled. Stephen, as the HOA's attorney, do we have legal standing here? A long pause. The situation is complicated. I'd need to review all the historical records to determine if there's any documented easement or agreement. But I'll be candid, if no such documentation exists, the HOA's position is vulnerable. Kevin Stone, a younger guy maybe in his 30s, shook his head. This is insane. We're potentially facing a lawsuit because of some backdoor deal from 20 years ago. Who made this arrangement in the first place? The original developer, Linda said. When the neighborhood was built. But the developer doesn't run the HOA anymore, hasn't for years, Kevin said. We can't be bound by their shady arrangements, especially if they weren't properly documented and transferred. Linda was losing control of the room. Deborah tried to help. The immediate problem is that the barn has no heat. The equipment will be damaged. We need to focus on solutions, not blame. The solution is for the HOA to get their own utility service, I said, speaking for the first time. Like you should have done all along. That takes 6 weeks, Linda shot back. What do we do until then? That's your problem to solve. Rent heaters. Move the equipment temporarily. I don't care, but you're not using another penny of my gas. Richard added, my client is also demanding full reimbursement for all gas costs related to heating the barn, plus interest, damages, and attorney fees. We're prepared to file suit if necessary. How much are we talking about? Paul asked, looking worried. Conservatively, $8,000 in gas costs alone. With interest, damages, and fees, we're looking at potentially $15,000 to $20,000. Paul turned to Linda, his face grave. Did you anticipate this potential liability when you refused to address the situation earlier? There was no situation until Marcus made one, Linda insisted. This was working fine. Working fine for who? Another homeowner called out. Not for him. The meeting devolved into chaos, with multiple people trying to talk at once. Some homeowners supported me, recognizing the unfairness. Others worried about the cost implications for the HOA and potential special assessments. Linda tried to regain control but failed. Finally, Stephen Crawford's voice cut through the noise on the speakerphone. Everyone, please. I need to consult with the board privately before we proceed further. I recommend we adjourn this meeting and reconvene in a few days once I've had time to review the records and assess our options. We don't have a few days, Linda protested. The equipment needs protection now. Then I suggest you rent portable heaters as Mr. Lancaster suggested, Stephen said bluntly. Because you're not going to strong-arm him into providing free utilities, and any attempt to do so will only make the HOA's legal position worse. Richard leaned toward me and whispered, this is going well. They know they're screwed. The meeting broke up with nothing resolved, except that the HOA would rent temporary heating equipment for the barn, while they expedited getting proper utility service installed. Several neighbors came up to me afterward, some apologetic, others curious, a few clearly angry that I'd rocked the boat. An elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, no relation to the deputy, touched my arm gently. I'm sorry this happened to you. It's not right. I had no idea. Thanks, I said. I just want what's fair, of course. Most of us would do the same in your position. But not everyone was sympathetic. A man named Gary something or other got in my face as I was leaving. You realize this is probably going to cost all of us money, right? The HOA will have to raise dues or issue an assessment to cover the new utility installation and whatever settlement they have to pay you. Then you should be mad at Linda and the board for setting up an illegal arrangement, not at me for refusing to be stolen from, I replied. All I know is my dues are going to go up because you couldn't just go along with how things were, Gary grumbled. Richard stepped between us. If you have complaints about HOA management, take it up with the board. My client has no obligation to subsidize your neighborhood services. We left before things could escalate further. In the parking lot, Richard gave me his assessment. They'll settle. They have no choice. Crawford knows it, even if Linda doesn't want to admit it yet. Give it a week, maybe two. They'll come back with an offer. What if they don't? I asked. Then we file suit and take depositions. Once we start questioning board members under oath about who knew what and when, they'll fold. HOA insurance might cover some of it, but there's also potential for personal liability if we can show gross negligence or willful misconduct. That thought made me feel a little better. I went home and tried to decompress, but sleep was difficult. I kept replaying the meeting in my head, the accusations, the arguments, the looks from my neighbors. The next morning, I woke up to find a violation notice from the HOA taped to my front door. According to the notice, I was being fined $500 for unauthorized modification of HOA utility infrastructure, and another $500 for causing damage to common property. I took a photo of the notice and immediately forwarded it to Richard. He called me back within 20 minutes, laughing. They're idiots. This is retaliation, pure and simple. Keep the notice. It'll look great in court when we argue for punitive damages. Can they actually fine me for this? I asked. They can issue the fine, but it's completely unenforceable. You didn't modify their infrastructure. You modified yours. And you didn't damage their property. They're just lashing out because they're losing control of the situation. Over the next few days, things got worse before they got better. Linda sent a mass email to the entire HOA membership, portraying me as a troublemaker who cared more about technicalities than community welfare. She claimed the barn heating situation was a long-standing community agreement that I was unilaterally destroying for personal gain. I drafted a response email with Richard's help, laying out the facts. I never agreed to pay for barn utilities. The arrangement was never disclosed to me. The HOA had stolen thousands of dollars from me, and all I wanted was fair reimbursement. We sent it to the full membership as well. The neighborhood divided into camps. Some people understood and supported me. Others thought I should have just accepted the situation for the good of the community. A few, like Gary, were openly hostile. Someone egged my house. I filed a police report, though I had no proof who did it. My mailbox was vandalized, knocked clean off its post. More police reports. Linda denied any knowledge, of course, but also sent me another violation notice for having a damaged mailbox, which was technically against HOA regulations. Richard was building a beautiful case for harassment and retaliation. Every action the HOA took just made their liability worse. 2 weeks after the meeting, the gas company finished their investigation. They sent me a formal letter confirming that an illegal tap had been installed on my gas line, that I was not responsible for the usage attributed to it, and that they would be adjusting my bills accordingly. They'd also filed their own complaint with local authorities since utility theft fell under their jurisdiction. The adjusted bills arrived a week later. The gas company recalculated 18 months of usage, removing the estimated consumption of the barn's furnace. They credited my account $9,247. The number was actually higher than I'd estimated. I forwarded everything to Richard. "This is perfect," he said. "Now we have the gas company's official documentation that theft occurred. This strengthens both the criminal case and our civil claim." A few days later, Deputy Chen called me. "I wanted to give you a heads up. The prosecutor has decided to move forward with charges. They're filing theft of services charges against Linda Patterson as HOA president, and potentially against other board members depending on what we uncover about their knowledge of the situation." My stomach flipped. I wanted accountability, but actual criminal charges felt serious. What does that mean? Given the amount involved, it's a felony. If convicted, she could face jail time, though more likely probation and restitution. But it sends a message that this kind of thing isn't acceptable. The charges were filed on a Thursday. By Friday morning, the news was all over the neighborhood. Linda's response was to send yet another email, claiming she was being persecuted for faithfully serving the community, and that I had weaponized the justice system against her. Richard just shook his head when he read it. She really doesn't know when to stop digging, does she? The following Monday, I got a call from Stephen Crawford, the HOA's attorney. He wanted to set up a meeting to discuss resolution options. Richard and I met with him and the full HOA board, minus Linda, who was apparently too angry to attend productively. Stephen laid it out plainly. The HOA's insurance carrier has reviewed the situation. They're willing to offer a settlement of $12,000 to resolve all civil claims, plus agreeing to drop any and all fines or violations issued against Mr. Lancaster related to this matter. What about the criminal charges? I asked. Those are beyond the HOA's control. That's between Miss Patterson and the prosecutor. But we'd hope that a civil settlement might demonstrate good faith and perhaps influence how aggressively those charges are pursued. Richard and I stepped out to confer privately. What do you think? I asked him. It's a reasonable offer. More than the actual gas costs, which compensates you for the hassle and harassment. You could push for more, but it might not be worth the extended fight. Up to you. I thought about it. $12,000 would cover my gas costs, Richard's fees, and leave me with a few thousand extra for my trouble. More importantly, I'd be done with this nightmare. I'll take it, I decided. But I wanted in writing that they admit no arrangement existed and that they apologize for the violations and harassment. Stephen agreed to those terms. We had a settlement agreement drafted and signed within a week. The HOA paid me $12,000. They officially rescinded all fines and violations. They issued a letter to the neighborhood explaining that a utility billing error had been corrected, without admitting criminal wrongdoing but making clear I'd been vindicated. Linda, meanwhile, was fighting the criminal charges. She hired a defense attorney and pleaded not guilty. I had to testify at a preliminary hearing, explaining what happened and how I discovered the theft. The judge found sufficient evidence to proceed to trial, but Linda never made it to trial. Her attorney negotiated a plea deal. She pled guilty to a reduced misdemeanor charge in exchange for probation, community service, and paying restitution directly to me for an additional $2,000 to cover costs not included in the civil settlement. She also had to resign from the HOA board immediately. The day her resignation was announced, I felt like I could finally breathe. The whole ordeal had taken almost 4 months from start to finish, but it was over. The HOA held new elections. Paul Matthews became the new president. Kevin Stone remained on the board. They brought in 3 new members who campaigned on transparency and proper governance. One of the first things they did was commission a full audit of HOA finances and infrastructure to make sure no other shady arrangements existed. They found a few irregularities, nothing as bad as my situation, but enough to warrant changes. The new board rewrote portions of the bylaws, implemented better oversight procedures, and started publishing monthly financial reports so homeowners could see exactly how their dues were being spent. My relationship with the neighborhood gradually normalized. The people who'd been hostile mostly came around once they understood the full situation. A few apologized directly. Mrs. Chen baked me cookies. Gary, the guy who'd gotten in my face, never apologized but at least stopped glaring at me. The barn got proper utility service installed. The gas company finally ran a new line and meter, which took 6 weeks, just like they'd said. The HOA paid for it through a small special assessment, about $80 per household, which some people grumbled about but most accepted as necessary. The actual furnace that had been heating the barn while connected to my gas line became a point of contention. It was still sitting in the barn, disconnected and unused now that the building had its own furnace installed with the new gas service. The new board debated what to do with it. At a board meeting in late May, Paul brought up the question. We've got this furnace sitting unused. It's worth maybe $800 to $1,000. Should we sell it and recoup some money or keep it as a backup? I was attending the meeting as a regular member. I raised my hand. Actually, I'd like to make a claim on that furnace. Paul looked confused. What do you mean? That furnace was connected to my gas meter illegally. It used my gas for 18 months. I think a reasonable argument could be made that since it was operated at my expense without my permission, I have some claim to it. I'd like to take it and sell it myself. The room went quiet. Kevin frowned. That's a stretch, Marcus. The HOA owns the furnace. Just because it was connected to your meter doesn't make it yours. Richard, who I'd brought along just in case, spoke up. Actually, there's an interesting legal principle here. When property is operated entirely at someone else's expense for an extended period, equity can sometimes transfer ownership based on the financial investment. Mr. Lancaster essentially paid for that furnace's operation for 18 months. He has a claim. We already paid him a settlement, Paul objected. For the gas costs, yes. But the furnace itself was never addressed. Think of it this way. If I park my car in your garage and you pay for all its maintenance and fuel for 18 months without any agreement to do so, you develop an equitable interest in that car. Stephen Crawford was also present, still representing the HOA. He rubbed his temples. This is getting ridiculous. The furnace is worth less than $1,000. Then give it to me and we're done, I said. Or we can argue about it in court, which will cost the HOA more in legal fees than the furnace is worth. Paul looked at the other board members. They had a whispered consultation. Finally, he sighed. Fine, take the furnace. I don't want to spend another $1 on attorneys arguing about this, but you're responsible for removing it from the barn. I agreed immediately. The next day, I hired a HVAC contractor to disconnect and remove the furnace. It was a nice unit, actually, a high-efficiency model that was only about 4 years old. The contractor said it would bring $1,200 to $1,500 at auction. I listed it with a local equipment auction house. It sold 3 weeks later for $1,400. I used the money to take a long weekend vacation to Chicago. My first real break since the whole nightmare began. Sitting in a restaurant overlooking the Chicago River, I reflected on everything that had happened. It had been exhausting and stressful, but I'd stood my ground. I'd refused to be taken advantage of. I'd fought back against an HOA that thought it could bully and steal from its members without consequences. Linda Patterson had learned that actions have consequences. The old HOA board had been shaken up. The neighborhood now had better governance and transparency, and I'd been made financially whole plus a little extra. Was it worth the stress and conflict? I thought about that question a lot. Part of me wished I'd never discovered the illegal connection, that I'd just gone on living in ignorant bliss. But that wasn't realistic. The theft was real, the money was real, and turning a blind eye would have just enabled the abuse to continue. No, I'd made the right choice. Standing up to corruption and theft, even in something as mundane as an HOA, mattered. It set a precedent. It showed that regular people couldn't just be exploited and expected to accept it. I returned home from Chicago refreshed and ready to move forward. The neighborhood drama had finally settled down. Summer was coming, the weather was beautiful, and life was getting back to normal. Then, about a month after the furnace sale, I got an interesting phone call. It was from a reporter at the Grand Rapids Press, the local newspaper. Someone had tipped them off about the whole HOA situation, and they wanted to do a story about it. I consulted with Richard first. He thought it was a good idea. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. More people should know that HOAs can't just run roughshod over homeowners. Your story could help others in similar situations. I agreed to the interview. The reporter, a young woman named Amy Stiles, came to my house and spent 2 hours getting the full story. She was thorough, asking detailed questions and taking copious notes. She also interviewed Paul Matthews, Kevin Stone, and even reached out to Linda Patterson, though Linda declined to comment. The story ran on a Sunday in mid-July, front page of the local section. The headline read, "Homeowner battles HOA over illegal utility theft." It laid out everything that happened, including the criminal charges against Linda, the settlement, and even the furnace situation. The response was immediate. The newspaper's website crashed from traffic. The story got picked up by regional news outlets, then by national homeowner advocacy groups. I started getting emails and calls from people all over the country who'd had their own HOA nightmares. A few local TV stations asked for interviews. I did one with the Grand Rapids NBC affiliate. The story aired during the evening news. My phone blew up with messages from friends and family who'd seen it. Some of the attention was uncomfortable. I'm not a public person by nature, but Richard was right. The story helped people. I heard from 3 different homeowners in Michigan alone who discovered similar utility theft situations in their own HOAs and used my story as a template for how to fight back. One guy, Steve from Ann Arbor, had been paying for water service to his HOA's pool house for 5 years. He followed my playbook, documented everything, got the utility company involved, filed police reports, hired a lawyer. His HOA settled for $18,000 rather than face criminal charges. He called me personally to say thank you. I had no idea I could fight back. I thought I just had to accept it because it was the HOA. Your story showed me otherwise. That made all the stress worthwhile. Helping others avoid being victimized the way I was gave meaning to the whole ordeal. Life in Pinewood Grove settled into a new normal. The neighborhood had a better HOA board, better transparency, better governance. People were more engaged, more willing to ask questions and demand accountability. The whole situation, as painful as it was, had ultimately made the community stronger. Linda Patterson moved away about 6 months after her conviction. I heard through the grapevine that she'd taken a job in another state. I never saw her again, which was fine by me. Deborah Hughes, the former vice president who'd been so hostile, also left the board and kept a much lower profile. She still lived in the neighborhood but stayed out of HOA politics. The new board actually did a pretty good job. They fixed long-standing maintenance issues, improved communication, and managed the budget responsibly. My HOA dues stayed stable. The neighborhood looked better than it had in years. I even got involved myself, volunteering for the Architectural Review Committee. It felt good to contribute positively rather than just being the guy who'd fought with the HOA. I could help make sure other homeowners were treated fairly when they wanted to make improvements to their properties. The furnace money, combined with the settlement, gave me a financial cushion I'd never had before. I used some of it to renovate my kitchen, something I'd been wanting to do. I invested the rest. For the first time in my adult life, I had actual savings beyond a small emergency fund. More importantly, I'd learned that I could stand up for myself. I'd faced down threats, harassment, and intimidation, and I'd won. That confidence carried over into other parts of my life. I negotiated a raise at work, leveraging my skills and experience more effectively than I would have before. I was more willing to speak up generally when I saw something wrong. The whole experience changed me, mostly for the better. Yes, it was stressful. Yes, there were times I wanted to just give up and let them win. But I hadn't, and that mattered. A year after it all started, I was sitting on my back deck on a warm evening, grilling burgers and drinking a beer. Mrs. Chen from next door came over with her husband to say hello. We chatted about neighborhood stuff, the upcoming 4th of July party, the new playground equipment the HOA was installing. It was normal, pleasant, drama-free. Exactly what living in a neighborhood should be. Mrs. Chen's husband, Robert, asked how I was doing. After all that craziness last year, that must have been quite an ordeal. It was, I admitted, but it worked out, and honestly, I think the neighborhood is better for it. Oh, absolutely, Mrs. Chen agreed. The HOA actually functions properly now. We know where our money is going. There's accountability. That's all because you stood up and said something. I just didn't want to pay for something that wasn't mine, I said with a shrug. That's how it starts, Robert said. One person saying enough, next thing you know, everything's changed for the better. You should be proud. I was proud, though I wouldn't have admitted it out loud. I'd faced down an unjust situation and won. I'd held powerful people accountable. I'd made a difference, even if just in my small corner of suburban Michigan. The burgers finished cooking. I invited the Chens to stay and eat with me, and we spent the evening talking and laughing, enjoying the summer weather. It was perfect. That night, lying in bed, I thought about everything that had happened. From that first shocking heating bill to the criminal charges to the settlement to selling the furnace, it had been a wild ride. But I'd survived it. More than survived, I'd thrived. My house was truly mine now, not being used to subsidize HOA operations without my knowledge. My neighbors respected me, or at least most of them did. The neighborhood was well managed and transparent. I had savings in the bank and improvements to my home. Most importantly, I had the knowledge that I could fight back against injustice and win. That wasn't something you could put a price on. I'd gone into that first HOA meeting not knowing what to expect, just knowing I was being wronged and determined to do something about it. I'd faced threats, fines, harassment, vandalism, and constant pressure to just give up and accept the theft. But I hadn't given up. The legal system had worked, eventually. The police had taken my complaint seriously. The prosecutor had filed charges. The HOA's insurance had recognized their liability and paid up. My attorney had been competent and aggressive in protecting my rights. But none of that would have mattered if I hadn't been willing to fight in the first place. If I just accepted Linda Patterson's assertion that this is how things have always been done, and continued paying to heat their barn, nothing would have changed. Sometimes you have to be the person who says no, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it causes conflict, even when people call you a troublemaker or accuse you of not being a team player. Because some things are worth fighting for, and not being stolen from is definitely one of them. The HOA had gambled that I wouldn't notice, or wouldn't care, or wouldn't have the resources to fight back. They'd lost that gamble badly. The whole situation had cost them far more than if they'd just been honest and ethical from the start. That was the real lesson, I thought. Doing the right thing isn't just morally correct. It's also practically smarter. The shortcuts, the secret deals, the exploitation of homeowners, All of it had come back to bite the HOA far worse than just paying for their own utilities would have. Linda Patterson had lost her position, her reputation, and gained a criminal record. The HOA had paid out $14,000 in settlements and probably triple that in legal fees, all to avoid spending maybe $1,000 a year on legitimate utility service for their barn. Penny wise and pound foolish didn't even begin to cover it. I finally drifted off to sleep, content with how everything had turned out. The next morning, I woke up to sunshine and birdsong, made coffee, and sat on my deck reading the news on my tablet. Just a normal Sunday morning. My phone rang around 10. It was Paul Matthews, the HOA president. "Marcus, hey, sorry to bother you on the weekend. Quick question. We're getting quotes for repairing the tennis courts, and one of the contractors asked about utility access for their equipment. I wanted to make sure we handle this properly. Is there anything special we need to do to make sure we're not accidentally tapping into anyone's utilities?" I smiled. The fact that he was asking showed how much things had changed. "Just make sure the contractor brings their own generator or confirms with the utility company where they're connecting. Document everything in writing." Perfect, that's what I thought. "Thanks, Marcus, and hey, thanks again for everything last year. I know it was rough, but you really did this neighborhood a favor." "Just doing what needed to be done," I said, after we hung up. I reflected on how surreal it was that the HOA president was now calling me for advice on avoiding the exact kind of situation that had caused so much trouble. But that was exactly how it should be. Learning from mistakes, implementing better practices, and treating homeowners with respect. The rest of the summer passed peacefully. I dated a woman named Sarah for a few months, though it didn't work out long term. I got promoted at work, a nice bump in both title and pay. I took up woodworking as a hobby, building furniture in my garage. Life was good. The furnace saga became a story I told at parties, usually to laughs and disbelief. "Wait, you actually took their furnace?" someone would always ask. "Yep," I'd reply. "Sold it at auction and took a vacation with the money." It never got old. As fall arrived and heating season approached again, I watched my gas bills carefully. They were exactly what they should be for a house my size. No more mysterious $1,000 charges. Each reasonable bill felt like a small victory. The equipment barn sat behind the neighborhood with its own proper utility service, legally connected and paid for through HOA dues like it should have been from the start. The new furnace they'd installed worked fine. Nobody was being exploited to keep it running. Sometimes I'd walk past the barn on evening strolls through the neighborhood. I'd look at it and think about everything that had happened because of that building. The theft, the confrontation, the legal battle, the settlement, the criminal charges, the reforms. All because someone decided it was easier to steal from a homeowner than to do things properly. But they'd been wrong and they'd paid the price for being wrong. Justice had been served. The system had worked, and me. I was just a regular guy who'd stood up for himself when it mattered, nothing more, nothing less. But sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. The neighborhood moved on as neighborhoods do. New families moved in. Kids grew up. Seasons changed. Life continued its normal rhythms. The drama of the HOA utility theft became history, a story told to new residents as a cautionary tale. "Oh yeah, that was crazy," longtime residents would say. "Back when Linda was president, before the reforms, things are much better now," and they were better. Measurably, demonstrably better. Because one person had refused to accept being stolen from, had documented everything, had fought back through proper legal channels, and had won. That was my legacy in Pinewood Grove. Not the guy who caused trouble, though some might still see it that way. But the guy who stood up for what was right, held wrongdoers accountable, and made the community better for everyone. I could live with that. In fact, I was proud of it. As winter approached and the first snow fell, I cranked up my heat without worry. My furnace hummed along efficiently, heating only my house as it should. My gas bills were reasonable. My savings account was healthy. My conscience was clear. Standing at my window watching the snow fall, I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to standing up for yourself, to holding the powerful accountable, to refusing to be a victim, to justice, however long it takes to achieve. The furnace I'd removed and sold was long gone, keeping someone else's building warm now. But its absence from the HOA barn remained a permanent reminder of what happened when you tried to exploit people who knew their rights and refused to back down. That was worth more than any furnace could ever be. That was worth everything.